Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 95 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin, that is Mike, and I don't know about you guys, but something's a little different this episode that happens only once every 10 episodes, give or take.
I'm just going to say it. I'm better at these intros than you are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of it. But here's the thing. When Gavin does the intro, something special's going on. It's a Mike
That's
Takes
true.
the Wheel episode.
It
I'm
sure
excited because there was a journey that this one went on, and you guys are going to go through the journey with. This is not going to be like a good episode. It's going to be a fun story, though. I'll tell you what.
Absolutely, and I'm here for it. I love going on journeys.
But before we get to that journey, I was told that there's a holiday that we're celebrating today.
Absolutely. So, in a surprise twist of events, the 20%, between you and Fia, the 20% of episodes that are not about paleontology, one of them happens to fall on National Fossil Day, which is the day this episode goes out.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, so my university is doing some things out, like in our quad outside our geology building. We have lots of fossils out. We have a big tent, going out. I actually spent most of yesterday and today 3D printing some fossils, which was pretty cool. That was a new experience for me. To be able to have a couple different things besides the actual fossils that we have. Some things that are a little harder to get your actual hands on just because they're very rare fossils, but the people who do have them were kind enough to put 3D models of them online for free. So you could just take them and 3D print them and have them available for stuff like this. So yeah, I'm really excited. It's National Fossil Day. And in honor of that, I'd like to take you on a little journey as well of my learning about National Fossil Day, but specifically National Earth Science Week, which is also this week. That's why it's Fossil Day this week. But I didn't even know that there was Earth Science Week until at most 4 days ago.
Which is shocking considering who you are.
Yeah, right? So I'd always known National Fossil Day was a thing, but they just take this sort of entire week as National Earth Science Week. So the first Fossil Day was hosted in 2010, which was much more recent than I had kind of thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing stuff with fossils for a real long time, and I didn't think that this would be in my lifetime. Sort of like you think, what is it, like Earth Day? Yeah, Earth Day, I think the first Earth Day was in like 1970.
That sounds about right. Here, let's look this up. First held April 22nd, 1970. So,
Let's go.
The wonderful Nixon administration helped bring this to life.
Yeah, along with the probably coincides with the establishment of the EPA and all of that kind of.
I believe EPA was like 73 or so, but now we're gonna look this up. You keep talking.
Wow, the Earth Day predates the EPA. I'm learning so much.
I don't know
today.
that for sure, but so 1970. So Earth Day and the EPA I guess were the same year. Wild.
Wow, good on you, Richard Nixon.
Tell you what, Nixon.
One of the few times I'll say
he's a little bit
phrase.
Too famous for like a Mike Takes the Wheel episode, but Nixon deserves people got to know about that man beyond just Watergate.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, people all across the world of paleontology celebrate National Fossil Day. The National Park Service at pretty much any park that has significant paleontology has stuff about it. The American Geosciences Institute, the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, the Smithsonian, basically any museum does stuff for National Fossil Day. So if you happen to pass a museum or live nearby one, I'm sure they have some stuff going on this evening. So after you get done work, go over to your friendly local museum.
Yeah, which is always a good idea to try and do.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last quick housekeeping thing before we get into this wonderful journey that Mike is going to take us on. I have to do Fia's job of which she normally plugs all of our social media things. So do not forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube in order to give us feedback on the show. And if you have any future topics you'd like to hear on the podcast, you can let us know on those platforms, or we do have a Google form for that down in the show notes. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, make sure to fill out a different Google form, also down in the show notes. Hi, and just a quick word from editing Gavin, because I forgot to talk about the topic for next week's episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about private ownership and sales of fossils in various places around the world, because there's been a lot of that going on in very high-profile cases relatively recently. And depending on where you live in the world, this is completely acceptable or highly illegal. So I think it's interesting to talk about the differences between finding a fossil on this side of a line that people have drawn and it being totally fine, or finding a fossil on the other side of that line that people have drawn and it being able to throw you in jail for decades. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. So if you have any questions or thoughts or anything about that, make sure to let us know. Comment it on this episode of the YouTube version of this episode, or send it to us on Twitter, any of our comment forms. You all know what to do by now. So with that, let's get on to the episode. And with the house now being kept, Mike, take us away.
So for those of you that are new here, for the Mike Takes the Wheel episodes, basically I am a high school social studies teacher, and I try to highlight different people that just kind of have existed throughout time. The one rule being that they have to be dead, that you deserve to know. So we mentioned earlier Richard Nixon. I have a lot of stuff that I want to say about Richard Nixon, but everybody kind of knows Richard Nixon. I might be able to bring some new stuff to light, Lebowski, but I'm not going to be enlightening you on a new person, and that's sort of been the goal here. We talked about sports, and we've talked about political figures. We've talked about some soldiers in these, and I wanted to do a musician for this episode. I just had it in my idea. I want to talk about famous musician, and so of course that means I kind of have to dig through the archives. I want to try and find somebody that is really interesting to talk about, but I don't want to be talking to everybody, be like, I don't know if you're familiar with this John Lennon guy, but so I don't want to do any of that, or Jimi Hendrix or Kurt Cobain.
Right, yeah.
Like I want to stay away from the well-trod topics. And so at that point I remembered that from years and years ago, are you familiar with the website, Gavin, cracked.com?
I don't believe I've ever been there, but I've definitely heard of it.
It used to be good, and then it wasn't good anymore when they fired all the good people. But as a teenager, I loved crack.com. They had all these really cool list articles about 6 people you've never heard of and 7 things that changed the blah blah blah. And I remembered they did 5 people that secretly made all the music that you listened to, or something to that effect. And there was this woman in there who had she had played bass on, I think the number was like 10,000 recordings, some incredible number. And so I went and I did some digging, and I was able to find that article, and I was able to find that person, and her name is Carol Kay, who played bass on over 10,000 recordings is the number that's commonly cited. I believe she played with the Doors, she played with Neil Young, she played on Hawaii Five-O, she played on an incredible amount of things. The Monkees, she played with Sonny and Cher.
So
all up and down.
Like never like toured with them, just like recorded in studio on tracks, right? Is that?
I believe she was mostly just kind of like a session musician, so she would show up and play bass. In studio. I'm sure she's has played live and has done some touring.
Oh yeah, for sure.
She is more well known as being secretly the bass player on 1,000 songs that And so I was all excited to tell you guys the story of Carol Kay. The problem is that she's still alive.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, good for her, bad for a topic of our show.
Exactly. So she's 87, so we're getting there on her. We'll get there eventually, I hope. But not right now. So she's still alive. So Carol Kay, throw her out of there.
Sure.
And so I'm kind of racking my brain of other people of who I could do. There's Sid Vicious from I believe he was in the Sex Pistols. Yeah, I don't know if I want to do him. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, whatever. And again, I don't want to do somebody super well known. And then I remembered that I saw this video of that sort of went in depth on a guy that I really like and a band that I really like. And so, Gavin, I want to quickly play like a 20 questions kind of game here. This is going to be hard for you. I'm not sure you're going to get here, but
okay.
So there's a number of songs. You and I are in our mid-20s right now.
Right.
And there's kind of a number of songs that are just incredibly famous from when we were, children in, elementary and middle school that we look back on with nostalgia now.
Okay.
Do you think that you can get there? If I give you, I suppose we don't have to play 20 questions, but if I give you a couple of guesses, what are just some of, a couple of like the famous songs that people from our age would kind of smile and chuckle along and then sing along to if they heard them?
Sure.
Give me a
So,
couple here.
am I just throwing out songs, or
Just
am
throw
I
out some.
trying to
Yeah, throw out some famous
narrow
song
it down?
titles. If you want to narrow
Okay.
it down, if you want to do the 20 question style, we can absolutely do it that way too.
Ocean Avenue.
Not Ocean Avenue, although a similar genre of music.
Okay. It's like if I were to look through my phone right now, I definitely would have a long playlist of songs like this.
Absolutely.
But I'm kind of blanking. Is it a group or like an individual artist?
It is by a group. The song I'm talking about is by a group.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing.
No idea. If I gave you a hint and I told you that the band was Bowling for Soup, does that jog your memory at all?
1985.
Close. That was the one big one. Do you have any other guess?
Come Back to Texas?
Not Come
Or
Back to
Ohio?
Texas.
Which either of... I don't remember which of those two is the technical
great song.
name
Big fan of Bowling for Soup. Any other guess?
Is it originally by them?
No.
Who's it by then?
So it's originally by a band called Fountains of Wayne.
Oh. Their only song.
You might think so, but go ahead and say
the only song that I have ever heard from them.
Which is?
Stacy's Mom.
Stacy's Mom. And so the reason why I brought up Bowling for Soup is because everybody seems to think that Bowling for Soup wrote Stacy's Mom, to the point where Bowling for Soup was sick and tired of getting asked to play Stacy's Mom at their concerts. And they
Did they even cover it?
They eventually recorded a cover of it because they got so sick and tired of it. But there are videos online of Bowling for Soup being like, who came here to hear us play Stacy's Mom? And the crowd goes nuts. And they're like, that's not our
really
song.
Funny.
That is not
That's
our
amazing.
song.
I did not know the deep lore of Stacy's Mom.
Yeah, and there's also some deep lore of again, Fountains of Wayne, the band that actually wrote Stacy's Mom, and Adam Schlesinger, who did a lot more than you realize. And as Gavin, you're in the doc here, as you can see kind of by the title of this episode, Adam Schlesinger is the guy I want to talk about here. And there's a video online that was that really kind of opened my mind as somebody that, oh wow, he did a lot of other things. First off, Fountains of Wayne is just kind of a cool band that I think more people should know beyond just Stacy's Mom. But he also had a hand in a bunch of other stuff. Problem is, I don't quite know how interesting that is to just talk about one guy and like he wrote a bunch of other cool songs. Sure. So we're not doing Adam Schlesinger either. So we're throwing that aside. And so at this point, it's like 8:35, and we're recording at, we started recording at 9:00, and I'm just like, man, like we could do Adam Schlesinger, but I don't know how interesting that is. And I'm sort of like expanding what I want to talk about. Maybe it doesn't have to be a musician today. Maybe I'll talk about somebody a little bit more famous. And then it hits me. We can combine the musician thing with something that's more in my wheelhouse. So Gavin, are you familiar with the punk rock band, the Dead Kennedys?
Again, it's one that I'm like, I'm sure that I've heard the name before, but I could not name you a song by them.
So the Dead Kennedys, a famous punk rock band named after, of course, many dead Kennedys. Sure. And so today, we are not going to talk about the band, the Dead Kennedys. We are going to talk about some lesser known actual dead Kennedys today for our episode. And that is how we got to the actual topic of our episode.
When you told me that we were going on a journey to get to the topic of today's episode, this is not where I thought we were going to end up.
Oh, really?
Not even a little.
Is this better or worse?
Undecided. Well, because the first, I looked at the doc a little bit. And I looked at the first couple bullets, and the first one just says, "I wanted to do a musician," and I'm like, okay, it's gonna be some kind of music thing. That's cool. Psych.
Yep. Yeah. As it turns out, I really did. And so at some point, I would still like to do kind of a lesser known
Right. Yeah.
musician that that's kind of had more of a more of a reach, and I will continue my research on that front. But today, sort of continuing the theme of going a little bit deeper and in a slightly different direction than people might not know. I like to talk about some dead Kennedys that people aren't familiar with. So, Gavin, are you familiar with any actual members of the Kennedy family?
I mean, there's the obvious, I guess, three:
Okay, and who are they?
the actual president JFK,
Correct.
his brother Bobby, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, she's Kennedy by marriage, but JFK's wife Jackie.
Yeah, so there's Jackie Kennedy as well. So we're going to talk about, there is
And I know they
also,
had a bunch of kids as well, but
we're going to get there. So,
oh, isn't there the one who was like a sort of current politician who's now like super anti-vaxxy? Isn't he?
so what you are
Isn't that
referring
Robert
to,
Kennedy?
that is Robert Kennedy Jr. So Bobby
Right.
Kennedy. So the kind of what I would say the three famous Kennedys. You named two of them. So you've got obviously President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, assassinated November 22nd, 1963. Everybody knows about him. I think most people are broadly familiar with Bobby Kennedy. He was a senator from New York. He runs for president in 1968, and he's assassinated by a man named Sirhan Sirhan. Um, and then there's also Teddy Kennedy,
Yes.
who was a
Okay.
senator from Massachusetts for decades, was very instrumental in healthcare reform. He was also this just horrific sexual pig that White House aides were told, like, do not go around that man if you were
Gross.
a young woman. Yeah, and he had a rather long career. And those are kind of the three famous Kennedys here. And Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy had his son, RFK Jr., that is now kind of a big anti-vax weirdo. We're not going to talk
Yeah.
about any of them today. Instead, I'd like to talk about three Kennedys that are a little bit lesser known, and I think they range from, oh yeah, I think I'm vaguely aware of this story, to I had no idea that was ever a thing. And
Okay.
so there are three Kennedys that I'd like to talk about here today. And we'll begin here with Joe Kennedy Jr., JFK's older brother. He's the firstborn child to Joseph and Rose Kennedy. And Joseph Kennedy Sr., his father, had been grooming him to run for
Hmm.
president since he was birth. He wanted his son to be the first Catholic president. And so, as part of that, and the Kennedy family would talk pretty openly about this, they were pretty strong in Massachusetts politics.
Right.
Um, Joe Kennedy had been sent to observe a pretty strong leader in 1934. And the quote that Joe Kennedy came back with after going to visit Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler in 1934 was that he wrote to his father and praised Hitler's sterilization policy as a great thing that will do away with many of the disgusting specimens of men.
Oh.
Yes. Kennedy went on to explain Hitler is building a spirit in his men that could be envied in any country. So,
Hmm.
kind of rough stuff.
I mean, what white politician wasn't dabbling in eugenics in the 1920s to early 1940s?
That is a fair way to think about that. So, some light eugenics, or Hitler level eugenics, yeah, whatever.
Well, yeah.
You give the man a little bit of credit. He leaves Harvard in 1941 to go into the Navy to be a fighter pilot, and he's he's going to have a law degree from Harvard. He's going to be in the military. This is kind of exactly what you're looking for if you are if you're going to be looking to run for president at one day. And
Right.
so, however, unfortunately, in 1944, so near the end of the war, with about a year left in the war, Joe Kennedy dies. There's a plane explosion that that seems to be, as best as I can tell, just kind of glancing at the Wikipedia article, it's a little bit unclear exactly how it happened, but there were explosives on a plane, and there was some sort of glitch, and the plane winds up blowing up August 12th, 1944.
Oh
And with it,
no.
yeah, and with it,
What a shame.
exactly, and with it, Joe
The
Kennedy.
the Nazi sympathizer dies in a plane crash. Oh no.
Yes, and I mean, again, to be fair, he said what he said in 1934, and he does join the war to fight against the Nazis as World War II breaks out. So, like, it feels very icky to me, but I, you know, he did join up to fight against Hitler. Give him whatever you want to give him
The
on that
eugenic
front.
stuff, yeah, that's fine. It's the taking over other countries. That's the tricky bit. That
Right, that's where it gets him. So, Joe Kennedy at this point, he is dead, and this is sort of where JFK comes to real prominence
right.
in the Kennedy family, and this is also a little bit where Bobby Kennedy rises up. The the Kennedy family, specifically Joe Sr., was really kind of pushing his two oldest sons into politics, which were
Hmm.
Joe Jr., who we just talked about, and famously JFK. But now with Joe Jr. dead, this is where Bobby Kennedy is able to kind of rise up and
Right.
start taking a firmer hold in the Kennedy family's plans. And then later we get to Ted Kennedy. But it's not just those three or four Kennedys. The Kennedys had a sister, actually more than one sister. And so they had, if I'm remembering correctly, there was one sister that was kind of instrumental in founding the Special Olympics. I'm blanking a little bit on the specifics of the other sister that I am not planning on talking about. Kathleen Kennedy, Eunice Kennedy, Patricia Kennedy. There was a number of them there, but we're going to talk about
And
it.
they were just to be clear for my own mind,
Yes,
these are all JFK's siblings.
these are all of JFK's siblings. But we're going to talk about a
Wow.
Kennedy that family would rather us actually not talk about here today. A woman named Rosemary Kennedy. So she's born in 1918 as the younger sister of John Kennedy, President Kennedy. Um, and she appeared to be, kind of from early on in her life, she appeared to be rather slow developing. There are some reports the Kennedys think that she may have been intellectually disabled. Um, but it's a little bit unclear exactly what was going on, and partially because we don't really want to take the Kennedys' word for this, particularly what was going on in her younger life, and we'll see why in a little bit. I did appreciate this
Well, I
story.
mean, given what you just told us about old Joe Kennedy, uh someone with some kind of intellectual or learning disability probably might not sit too well in the eugenicsy vibe of apparently the Kennedy dynasty of the early 1900s.
I'm glad you were able to tie that together before I even brought it up. So, because you are more right than you think. I did appreciate this story when she was, I believe, I'm 20 years old in 1938, so 19 or 20 years old. She was presented to King George the Sixth and Queen Elizabeth at Buckingham Palace. She had been practicing her royal curtsy for hours and hours, and when she got there, she nearly tripped and fell. And her mother never really discussed the incident, and they treated it as though nothing had ever happened. And apparently, the king and queen smiled as though everything went well, which was a story that I appreciated. Um, but kind of taking another dark turn, the in her kind of young adult years, Rosemary Kennedy was experiencing seizures, violent mood swings. She was expelled from a summer camp at one point. The nuns in her schools thought that she was sexually active, and kind of all of this combining. At this point, she is in her early 20s. Her parents were worried that her just wild, erratic behavior could endanger the family's political career. The last thing you want to have happen is to be answering for a member of your family, kind of being a jerk. And if you don't understand that, you can ask the current president about his son
Yeah, I
and his
wasn't. I
various
was. That's
misgivings.
exactly what I was just thinking. I wasn't going to
Yeah.
say it, but
Right, exactly. Like, the last thing you want to be doing is answering for your talentless hack family members that have nothing to do with you.
Right.
And yeah, right. And Rosemary Kennedy, again, may not have grown up in the most loving household for somebody that needed some extra love and care, but was very clear, like, she was not going to be like a model Kennedy, as they would have described it. And so, in response to all of these issues in 1941, at the age of 23, her family arranged for her to have a lobotomy, which is where there's
Mm.
there are some different ways this can be done, but basically where either some wires will be stuck into kind of the frontal part of your brain or something
Hmm.
similar, and they basically scramble your brain.
So
And
yeah, they basically
Mhm.
separate the like frontal lobe from the rest of the brain. And I am not, I know a lot of things about anatomy. The brain is not one of my strong suits. Um but from what I know, the frontal lobe is most of like what makes you a person, more or less.
Yep.
Um so yeah, lobotomies were very common in the early 1900s, once we actually started to really understand the brain and what different parts of it did.
hmm And there's a reason they are not particularly common now.
Yeah.
I would imagine that at some point, somewhere, a lobotomy took place that helped solve, you know, mood problems um, and things of that sort. Like I'm, I'm willing to believe that at least one time in history that took place. I'm unfamiliar with it, and unfortunately for Rosemary Kennedy, that was not the case for her. The procedure was, pretty much an immediate failure, and it was known from the start. Her IQ kind of regressed. Her intelligence regressed to the level of a 2-year-old. She was unable to speak intelligently. She was incontinent, and at this point, the Kennedys basically shove her in a closet and don't talk about her anymore. She was institutionalized. Rosemary, her mother, or pardon me, Rose, um, didn't visit her for 20 years. Her father, Joe Kennedy Sr., never visited his daughter in this institution. The Kennedys just never talked about her. And if she was ever asked about, they just said, she's kind of a recluse. She doesn't like the spotlight, and we're going to respect her privacy. Um, and they didn't talk about her really at all. And so from 1941, when she had that lobotomy, until 2005, she was institutionalized and rarely spoken of, um, and basically neglected and forgotten in the whole Kennedy clan,
So
and
I
very
guess my
intentionally so. Let me add that she was
right.
not forgotten. Like, oh, whoops, where's Rosemary? No, no, she was, very intentionally kept out of the spotlight.
So I guess my question follow up to that is, how do we know all of that now then?
There's been, so as you can imagine, the Kennedys are a particular brand of famous in this country, and there's been just a lot of work dug into the Kennedy family, and again, particularly on the backs of her three brothers, as well as Joe Kennedy Sr., kind of
Mhm.
piloting the way. There was, if I remember correctly, there was kind of a book that was written a number of years ago that kind of brought a lot of this to light. But at some point when we're talking about nearly 70 years of somebody being institutionalized from an incredibly famous family
Yeah.
where everybody else had very prominent roles in Democratic Party politics. At some point, people are going to start asking questions, and there's
Right.
only so long that secret, can be kept. Um, and so again, she was, her situation was kept in secrecy. She was isolated from her siblings. Eventually, her mom did go to visit her, kind of towards the end of her mother's life, but even still, it was, it's a sad existence for her, and just
Yeah.
right. And I'm sort of torn on this one in the sense of, you know, is this a 1940s procedure from a family that was trying to help somebody that they did not know how to help? And they were trying the best thing they had available at the time, and it just turned out that, as it turns out, lobotomies don't work? Or is this a family that just, had no regard for any kind of dissent, and her problems were incredibly overblown, and this was seen as a way to possibly, get out of it, cheap and easy, of getting out of how to actually like raise a daughter? I probably lean more towards the latter, but
I mean, I'm sure it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
absolutely, absolutely, and I don't, you know, I don't want to presuppose onto that because again, just the secrecy with which they keep that Rosemary has been kept, and many of the people that were involved in this at this point, including Rosemary herself,
Hmm.
are dead. I'm just glancing over her Wikipedia page here. It says her lobotomy did not become public knowledge until 1987. So again, that is over
Wow.
40 years,
Yeah.
over 45 years that it was kept in secrecy. So that is one of the Kennedy sisters. There is one final dead Kennedy that I would like to bring to light today. Um, and it's sort of a different variety than the other two. So we've talked about two of JFK's siblings. But Gavin, JFK had some children of his own.
He
Do
did.
you know how many children that JFK had?
No. Not I based on how many his parents had, I couldn't even wager a guess.
It actually, depending on how we're going to count here, is less than you think. So JFK and Jackie get married at some point in the 1950s. I forget the exact year. And shortly thereafter, they try to start having kids. In 1955, Jackie Kennedy suffers a miscarriage for pregnancy number one. In 1956, there was sources will differ on this. There was either an unnamed stillborn daughter named Arabella, or either unnamed, or the daughter was stillborn and named Arabella, and this happens in
Hmm.
1956. So you've got two pregnancies that don't result in a live birth, one miscarriage and one stillborn for JFK and Jackie. But then some good news. Caroline Kennedy was born in 1957. And then JFK Jr., or John John, as he was known, was born in 1960, right as JFK
Hmm.
is taking office. Um,
Also, side note,
yeah,
could you imagine becoming president and also having two kids under 3?
it's about to get worse.
Cool.
So, and just for some context here, JFK Jr., became kind of a celebrity in his own right. He had starring roles on Seinfeld. Um,
Right. I've heard a bit about him here and there.
yeah, I shouldn't say starring roles, but he appeared on Seinfeld. He was this kind of heartthrob. Um, there had been some kind of rumblings that he would go into politics, which, given his family, wouldn't be all that surprising.
Yeah.
However, he winds up dying in a plane crash himself in the 1990s, I believe in his 40s. And so it's another Kennedy dying in the air. And Caroline Kennedy is still alive today, and she was rumored to be in the running for um, the New York Senate seat after Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State. She wound up turning that down, and she has since been the United States ambassador to Japan, and apparently is currently
Huh.
the ambassador to Australia. So
Interesting.
she's still around, still doing her thing again, kind of active in Democratic Party politics. It does not appear like she has any kind of large presidential ambitions at this point. And she is 64, and she appears to be plenty happy to be kind of serving her role
Well, that's
as a
by
Kennedy.
judging by presidential ages of the last,
Yep.
5 years. That's a spring chicken.
I look. I
68.
I may well wind up eating those words at some point. But so there's so those two are still alive. JFK wins the presidential election in 1960, and then in 1961 he takes office.
Hmm.
And a couple of years later, uh, JFK and Jackie were one of the rare couples that were still of child rearing age whilst in the White House. And Jackie becomes pregnant again in 1963, which, again, like you mentioned, with the ages of our recent presidents, is wild to think about. But even still, can you imagine the president of the United States, in addition to thinking about all the things the president has to consume on a daily basis, also now has a pregnant wife, two small children, and a third on the way. Um,
Particularly at
mhm.
this point in American history. Not that any time in American history has been like an easy time to be president,
Exactly. I mean, like,
but
yeah, right. Like, I don't know what Rutherford B. Hayes was doing when he was kicking around here, but he wasn't dealing with Nikita Khrushchev and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
right.
And
And
so
also correct me if I'm wrong here, a fun bit of civics. So the minimum age to be president is 35, right?
that's correct.
And JFK was in that ballpark. He wasn't much older than that.
JFK is the youngest elected president. However, he was not the youngest president. He was
Was there a vice president that took
correct. So
office
when
that was
Teddy
younger?
Roosevelt took
Right.
office as president, he was in his 30s. JFK here was born. Hold on, give me 1 second. I will be able to figure this out. Um, so JFK took office in 1961, and he was born in 1917. So he was 44 years old when he
Okay.
took office as president. So not like you know incredibly young, but still young enough.
Yeah.
So so Jackie's born, or pardon me, Jackie is pregnant. And on August, I believe it is 7th. Let me check here. August 7th, she is starting to feel some labor pain, some contractions. And 5.5 weeks early, she has a C-section for Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, who was born while his parents were in the White House. This is in 1963. Which again, imagine how crazy it is to have two small children in the White House, and now you've got an infant. Um,
Right.
that is incredibly wild to me um, that is a thing that would happen, and that there was no like paternity leave taken. Not hey, president, go take a week to yourself. We're gonna
Yeah.
let the vice president just like handle the job for a couple of weeks because I imagine you're a little bit busy. Um, Again, to me, that's wild, and I don't know how that would play out today if there was a president of child rearing age, if they would be encouraged to to step aside for for a short period of time just to just to make sure that their head was on straight.
Well, it's like, and uh, this is not the best comparison, but I know like a handful of like major athletes who,
Hmm.
they have kids and they're like, hey, I sure would like to spend time, being a parent. And they just get destroyed
Yep,
in the press
exactly.
for not caring enough about their duty to their fans and
Yeah,
their contract or whatever other excuse capitalism can come up with.
there was a player for the Mets a number of years ago that had to miss opening day because his
I
wife was
think I think
pregnant.
that's the one that I remember in
Yeah,
my brain because I
it was a
knew it
guy
was
named Daniel
something
Murphy,
opening day.
um, and there's people online saying, "Oh, if that were my wife, she would have had a C-section a week ago," and it's just the most disgusting things that people are saying about this kind of thing. And so again, the president of the United States, um, he could not be bothered to take some time off, and as we're about to
Mm,
see, maybe he should have, because Patrick Kennedy was born 5.5 weeks premature via C-section. And the president, again, this was premature. The president was occupied at the time. He's able to rush in to see his wife and newborn child after the child has been born. And JFK notices that his new son is having some trouble breathing. He seems like he's in distress. So immediately, JFK calls for a priest and has the child baptized. Again, the Kennedys were devout Catholics at this time, and it became clear that that Patrick Kennedy was suffering from something called hyaline membrane disease, which today is known as infant respiratory distress syndrome. The kid couldn't breathe, and so over the next 30 something hours, a number of attempts were made to try and save, the brand new first child.
mhm.
But unfortunately, 2 days later, on August 9th, Patrick Kennedy died. Um, and again, while his father was the president of the United States,
That's insane.
It's absolutely insane. And so now, if you go to Arlington National Cemetery, you will see, in addition
Mm.
to kind of the more well-known Kennedys, you will see Patrick Kennedy's tombstone, as well as, I believe it says, like, unnamed daughter, or something to that effect,
Hmm.
for the stillborn daughter that came earlier. And the again, the story of the Kennedys, the dead Kennedys go well beyond just kind of the more famous ones that you know of. There's a lot more to that family, and it can get a lot darker than a lot of people
Yeah.
realize. And the Kennedys have done a wonderful job at making sure that people don't talk about that. We talk about JFK and the Cuban Missile Crisis and who really killed him and everything else, but we don't talk much about that sister that nobody wants to mention, or
Hmm.
the stillborn, or the child that died 2 days into his life. I will add, a mere like 3 months before JFK himself was shot dead,
Right.
which is,
Yeah.
again, putting all this in context. I cannot imagine being First Lady Jackie Kennedy, being pregnant, losing another child, and then losing your husband shortly thereafter. I mean, what a whirlwind that she must have gone throughout that whole endeavor.
So there is this Twitter account that I personally very much enjoy. Pardon my language, but the account is called Crazy Ass Moments in American Politics,
An account you turned me on to, and I quite love.
and it's amazing. This whole thing with Patrick Kennedy should be the pinned tweet, because like
It's
that's insane.
right. And again, imagine this, like you mentioned, this is the height of the Cold War. This is, shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's nukes going around. Vietnam is, becoming more and more of a problem. It was a problem to some extent, though the war had not begun in earnest.
Yeah.
And the president of the United States is dealing with a newborn child and then grieving over the loss of that child. And it truly blows my mind that the president of the United States continued on in that capacity and did not, temporarily pass off some of those responsibilities to the vice president at that point. And it makes me wonder today, what would happen under similar circumstances. And I would just have to imagine that in that case, the president would, uh, abdicate some responsibilities and allow the vice president to be acting president for a period of time. But I mean, that's not what Kennedy did.
No.
And,
Although,
I'm not sure if I like that precedent being set.
right. Yeah. No, I agree. There is a fun, albeit very fictional, case study of this in The West Wing, the TV show.
Very fictional.
Very fictional, where the president's daughter was kidnapped, and he's like, I cannot make rational decisions about this.
Hmm.
So, and through a contrived series of events, he did not have a sitting vice president at the time. So he had to abdicate powers to the Speaker of the House, who was a member of the other party. Very interesting, dramatic stuff, as you would suspect a fictional TV show would be. But interesting things learning how various parts of our government work, even if I'm sure most of it's not completely correct.
Yes, that was acting President Glenn Allen Walken in The West Wing, which was an interesting storyline, to say the least, how that all comes together. It also coincides with when the creator of the show, whose name I'm blanking on right now for no reason, Aaron Sorkin,
Yes,
leaves, and what many people consider to be the downfall of The West Wing.
I
Though
agree.
I still,
I
I
still
still quite
enjoyed
like
it
it.
afterward.
Yeah, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
So this has been, this has been my Mike Takes the Wheel. I forget how many of these I've done now.
I want to say that this is number 8 because you were out in the mountains
Right,
for
for one of
what
them.
should have been your turn in the 80s
Right.
episodes.
So we'll say, this is my 7th or 8th one. And yeah, again, the goal being just to learn about some people and have some more knowledge about something that may well come up in conversation at some point if you're ever talking about the Kennedys. One of my favorite parts about this country is that every old Irish guy acts like they knew the Kennedys personally. And so now you have something to talk about them with. Here at the end
Absolutely.
of episode 95 of I Wish You Were Dead. Thank you, everybody, for listening and following along. And we'll be back next week with a regularly scheduled episode with Gavin leading the way. But until then, take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Mike Bryson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.